Again, everyone, welcome to our Wild Webcast, The Buzz About Pollinators. I'm Joe Jarrett with the Department's Outreach and Education Division, and I'll be hosting today's webcast. With me today are our two Conservation Department guest experts, Brent Vandelucht, who is our Agriculture Liaison with our Private Land Services Division, and Lisa Potter, who is our Private Lands Program Supervisor, also with our Private Land Services Division. So thank you for joining us today, Brent and Lisa.
Thanks, Joe. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
And also thank you to our more than 120 webcast participants for joining us today. We appreciate your time and your patience and your interest in this important topic. And I also would like to throw a shout out to photographer, landowner, and conservation partner Mark Ramsey for sharing some of his great images of butterflies and bees pollinating native plants. The timing of this webcast topic ties in very well with this being National Pollinator Week. So we want to wish everybody a happy National Pollinator Week.
Yay!
Yay! Here's what to expect. We'll cut to the chase. We will start with a conversation with Lisa and Brent on the important roles that butterflies, bees, and other pollinators play in our world. We will also talk about some serious threats to these pollinators, especially the monarch butterfly, and what we are doing to help them and what you can do to help them. After the conversation, we want to hear from you with your questions. So you can share your questions through the chat box located on the right side of your webcast screen. We'll cover as much as we can within the hour we have together. Let's start by getting to know our guests a little bit better. Lisa's worked for the Conservation Department's Private Land Services Division since June of 2006. For the past 5 years, she's served as the Private Lands Program Supervisor, where she's developed or enhanced financial and technical program opportunities to help private landowners implement wildlife habitat on their properties. Lisa also sits on the steering committee for the new Missourians for Monarchs Collaborative and has also assisted in the development of the Missouri Monarch and Pollinator Conservation Plan. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Wildlife Biology from Kansas State University and a Master of Science degree in Ecology and Evolutionary Biology from Iowa State University. Brent, as you know, is also with our Private Land Services Division and has served as the Private Lands Agricultural Liaison since January of 2015. Before that, he was a Private Lands Conservationist since January 2004, where he helped landowners on the ground in the field meet their land management goals by providing both technical expertise and helping them get financial help from MDC and other agencies. Brent has helped many private landowners over the past 12 years, particularly with warm season grasses, prairie restoration, and various pollinator projects. Brent has a biology degree from Westminster College in Fulton. So Lisa and Brent, let's get right to the buzz about pollinators, starting with this short video. Tell us what's going on here.
So what we're looking at here is just a great example of adult monarch butterflies foraging on New England aster. And it really helps demonstrate the importance of making sure that we're getting quality habitat out there.
That's very cool. So why are pollinators such as butterflies and bees really so important to us and to wildlife? Brent?
But Joe, pollinators play a critical role in production of many of the plants in the state of Missouri, including those that provide us with food, fiber, fuel, and medicine. In fact, about 75% of food production relies on pollination from some insect or another. If you think about that, that's like 4 out of 5 mouthfuls of food is created directly by the effects of pollinators. On the wildlife side, pollinators play a vital role to create habitats that most other animals rely on for food and shelter. So if you think about it, it's kind of like we used to talk about quail. Like good pollinator habitat is great for other species. So if you got good pollinator habitat, you got good habitat for other small game.
Well, so essentially without them, we wouldn't last very long.
That's right.
All right, so we've been hearing a lot about some sharply declining numbers of monarchs. What's happening there, Lisa?
Well, Joe, it's not just monarch butterflies. There's many species of pollinators, butterflies, bees, that they're all experiencing some severe declines. So, for instance, the monarch butterfly, over the past about 2 decades, their population has decreased by over 90%. So that's pretty severe, and so it got attention from a lot of folks of working together to bring back the monarch butterfly. And so I think what we're going to go through here, before I jump into why we all think that they're declining, let's first get to know a little bit about the monarch. Let's go through the biology and their habitat needs. So what we're looking at here is the life cycle of the monarch butterfly. There's actually 4 different parts to it. If you start there at the top of the diagram, the female monarch obviously plants or lays a seed or lays an egg on a monarch milkweed plant, excuse me. And that egg is really only the size of the tip of a pin. And a caterpillar, once that egg hatches into the caterpillar, these guys are eating machines. They can actually increase their mass by about 2,000%. By the time they first start eating, and 2 weeks later when they transition over to a chrysalis or cocoon. They'll be in the cocoon for about 2 weeks and they'll emerge as an adult butterfly. The whole process takes about 4 to 5 weeks. And I think we've got a really cool time-lapse video here to show you the process.
Well, that was pretty cool. Lisa, why don't you tell us more about their habitat needs?
Well, sure. Like I just talked about, there's different phases through the monarch life cycle, and we need to make sure that we're providing habitat for every life stage. So one of the most critical aspects of monarch habitat is making sure that there's milkweed out there, because milkweed is the only plant that adult butterfly is going to lay her egg on. Milkweed is also the only plant that the caterpillars will eat. So essentially, if there's no milkweed on the landscape, then we won't be able to support monarch populations. But it's not just the caterpillars that we have to provide for. We also have to make sure that there's habitat and there's food sources for the adult butterflies. So that also means that we need to make sure that there's lots of flowering plants out there for nectar sources for the adults. So in Missouri, there's actually 18 native species of milkweed. We're going to focus on 3 here during this talk, and really these 3 are probably going to be the most common that you see across the Missouri landscape. So common milkweed is probably the most common, and you'll find this plant or this species in disturbed areas. So you'll see a lot of them along roadsides. Then there's butterfly milkweed. You're going to find this plant in upland areas, in prairie soils. And then swamp milkweed, which as it sounds, you're going to find in wet areas, so maybe around streams or wetlands. But like I said, we also have to make sure that there's food out there for the adult butterflies. And so we really need to make sure that we're providing a diverse native flowering plants, flowering forbs out there on the landscape. And we want to make sure that we've got flowering plants all throughout the entire breeding and migratory season. So really that's from April to October that we need to have flowering plants out there. And of course, not only are we providing food for the monarch butterfly, but as Brent mentioned, you know, if we have a diverse flowers and plants out there, we're providing habitat for all sorts of other pollinators and wildlife.
Well, that is pretty amazing, and they then need to fuel up, because tell us a bit more about the incredible journeys that these tiny creatures make and some of the hazards they face along the way.
So this part is really cool. So this is one of the neatest things about the monarch butterfly. So what we're looking at here is a map of the primary migratory routes of a monarch butterfly. So I'll kind of walk you through this. So over winter, the monarch population goes to central Mexico. In early spring, the adult butterflies will start traveling north. That generation will stop in the southern U.S., so in Texas, and lay eggs. Those adults will die, and then the next generation of butterflies will continue their path northward. And it actually takes about 4 to 5 generations to make it all the way to Canada. And each generation really only survives about 2 to 6 weeks. But the really neat thing is that last generation of monarch butterflies that all the way up in Canada, they actually migrate the full close to 2,000 miles all the way back to Canada. And this generation can live up to 9 months. So that's amazing, considering that this monarch species weighs barely more than a paperclip, and for one generation to travel from Canada to Mexico is amazing.
That is pretty phenomenal. And I'm sure they face a lot of hazards along the way, and that's resulted in some dramatically declining numbers.
Yeah, that's right, Joe. And I think we've got a picture of a graph here that actually is there it is what is getting everyone's attention here. So this is a good visual look at just how far the population has decreased over the past 20 years. So you can see back in 1996, the overwintering ground, or really how we're actually monitoring their population size, the size of the area that they covered in Mexico was almost 44 acres. And of course that was a high point. But unfortunately, back in 2013 and 2014, we had probably our lowest recorded population of monarchs, and they were only covering just barely over an acre of ground in central Mexico. The average that over the past 20 years is about 15 acres or 6 hectares, and that's kind of our restoration goal here in the future, to hopefully get the populations back to those numbers.
So it's pretty alarming. It looks like numbers have dropped by 90% or so.
That's absolutely right, Joe.
Why don't you tell us a little bit, what are the reasons for these drastic declines?
So there's all sorts of factors that are playing into this. We'll just talk about a couple of them here. One of them that we're concerned about is invasive species. So even if you planted, or if you have an example of a most diverse grassland prairie, if you happen to have issues with invasive species such as Sericea lespedeza, pretty in quick time you can go from a diverse prairie to a monotypic strain of Sericea lespedeza, and obviously that's not providing the habitat that we've already talked about that the monarch needs. So invasive species is a big concern of ours. But then also weather events. Remember, a monarch weighs about as much as a paperclip. So if they happen to hit a poorly timed storm while they're migrating to and from Mexico, you can potentially lose, thousands, if not millions, of monarchs in one event.
Wow. What are some of the other factors?
Land conversion is also a concern and contributing to their decline. Of course, land conversion means we're losing habitat. And it's not just grassland acres being converted to agriculture. That's just part of the story. There's also urban expansion issues, urban sprawl. So what we're looking at here, the picture on the left is an aerial view of Columbia, Missouri back in the late 1800s. And then the picture on the right is a view of Columbia, Missouri today. So you can tell, back in the day, there was a lot of grassland habitat out there that potentially provided habitat for the monarchs. And today it is buildings and roads and concrete. And this isn't just, of course, an issue in Columbia, Missouri, or Missouri. It's happening all throughout the entire country and migratory pathway. And this slide here, this is just re-emphasizing that it's multiple factors that are all, unfortunately, working together to cause those 90% declines in the population. So mowing, if we're managing the habitat at the wrong times, we're potentially decreasing availability. Storms, like I talked about, invasive species, droughts, lack of milkweed on the landscape. But this also, in my mind, indicates that, yes, there's lots of issues that are contributing to the decline, but it also means that we all have to work together to, if we're going to be successful in restoring monarch populations.
Well, thank you, Lisa. That's some startling information. On the bright side, Brent, why don't you talk a bit about what we're doing to help and what other folks can do to help?
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to start with what the Conservation Department of Missouri has been doing, but we currently manage about 50,000 acres of grassland, glade, savanna, and woodland on our public lands. MDC's got several ongoing research projects looking at pollinator production, habitat, and health. We're also growing milkweed at our state nursery to provide seedlings for transplant use on our public land in the future. We're concentrating on 4 species: common, butterfly, swamp, and insolvents. But the idea there is to make sure there's ample seed out there on the landscape for us to do habitat work in the future. MDC staff also provide technical assistance to landowners, and we administer a program called the Landowner Assistance Program, where partners and cooperators can receive cost share and incentive payments to establish monarch pollinator habitat.
Cool. Why don't you tell us what's going on in those pictures?
Yeah, the picture there on the left is a demonstration project we did in Jeff City with the Association of Missouri Electrical Cooperatives. We planted a butterfly garden there in downtown Jefferson City. I think that was done this spring. And then the other 2 pictures are part of a program we do in partnership with Quail Forever called the Show Me Pollinator Plots. But basically, we have school kids go out and establish pollinator plots outside in their schools. It's a really cool program.
It's a great way to get the next generation of conservationists involved. So speaking of who's involved, who's involved with these efforts?
We've got a lot of excellent partners. I don't want to go through all of them, but you can see their logos up there. But a lot of excellent partners who are helping us ensure monarchs and pollinators have got a good place to stay as they come through Missouri.
Thank you, Brent. Why don't you tell us a bit about how landowners can help?
Sure. First and foremost, landowners need to learn to recognize milkweed and the quality nectar species that Lisa was talking about so they can protect and manage that existing habitat they have there on their properties. Managing existing habitat by implementing best management practices, and we'll get into that here in a minute, but that's by far the cheapest and most economical way to help pollinators in Missouri. After you take care of that existing habitat, take a hard look at your property and find areas where you can create new habitat, whether it's in your backyard or out there on the farm. And finally, just remember that there is help out there in the form of technical assistance and cost share through various programs and agencies.
Brent, who should, James asked, who do you contact for Landowner Assistance Program help?
Yeah, you can contact any MDC staff, but if you want to get right to the heart of it, call your private land conservationist. They're typically housed out of the local USDA office. So they do have 2 or 3 county assignments, but if you call that local USDA office, go to our website, you can get the phone number for our private land conservationists.
Good information, thanks. Why don't you tell us a bit about creating and managing that habitat?
Yeah, and you know, for our suburban landowners that may be listening in, if you want to create some new habitat, try to find a spot in your backyard that's at least 10 by 10 or 100 square feet and establish, you know, some milkweed and some nectar plants. But if you can at least go with 100 square feet, you can do some good in suburban areas. For our folks that are farmers or own farmsteads, look for unproductive or odd areas where you can establish a diverse mix of milkweed and forbs that won't affect the bottom line. You know, you want to keep up that productivity on your farm so you can pay for that expensive farm, but you can also provide some good habitat. So ponds that are excluded from cattle are an excellent example of a place where someone could establish some wildflowers for pollinators. If you go to do that, if you go to establish habitat, be sure you choose a pollinator mix that has various species blooming throughout the year, like Lisa said earlier, to make that plot attractive as the monarchs migrate through, and avoid management of that habitat during migration months. So stay out of there from May to October with any equipment or management activities. Typically, we talk about managing in thirds, and what that is come in and treat those acres. We set succession back on a third of those acres each year, so the other 2/3 are still providing habitat while the third you manage is resting and recovering.
All right, and tell us a bit about using prescribed fire.
Yeah, so some of those management practices that we're going to talk about are prescribed burning, spraying, and disking. And prescribed burning is an excellent tool that allows germination of annual seed-bearing plants. It increases plant diversity and can control unwanted woody sprouts. Burning can also improve pollinator nest sites, but you really want to avoid burning after mid-March to keep from destroying those eggs and larvae that may be out there on the landscape. Typically, on a normal year, we recommend that November is probably the ideal time to burn for monarchs because the monarchs have migrated through the state, the nectar sources have went dormant for the year, and a late fall burn is really good at stimulating forb production the next year for those nectar plants.
And some of the results here.
Yeah, this slide here, the picture on the left is that's the same field. Both those pictures on the left side had been burned in September. The right side had not. So you can see what one burn will do for diversity of the pasture or old field.
Talk about disking a little bit.
Yeah, disking is another option, especially for those folks that we run into that are not comfortable with prescribed fire. You can get on your tractor and kind of go out there in November and disc those plants or disc that field 2 to 4 inches deep. Try to create 30 to 70% bare ground, but the idea is still the same. Create that disturbance in November. One thing we do like to tell people, if you're going to be out there with heavy equipment, slow that tractor down to less than 8 miles per hour because there are other insects and pollinators that could be using that habitat. Use a flushing bar to give them a chance to escape your grill on your tractor. The next slide shows a tractor and a mower. Everybody likes to use these things, but it's really a good idea to limit your mowing whenever possible. You know, if you do have to mow habitat for some reason, keep that mower up high, 8 to 12 inches off the ground. But if you can avoid mowing, that's best, and certainly avoid mowing the entire field. Lay off the roadside ditches a little bit where you can. Those provide excellent habitat as well. And there is one instance when we do recommend mowing, and that's if you're creating new habitat for the first year. It is necessary to go out there and mow weedy competition off the top of those wildflowers because they spend the first year of their life putting down roots and not growing up. So it's good to mow the weeds off the top of those.
It's good to know.
Yeah. Another management option is the use of herbicides and spraying. The trick to remember here is you know, always use the labeled rates and approved herbicides for what you're trying to do. So follow that labeled rate. It's always best to use a grass selective herbicide when possible as opposed to a broad spectrum herbicide. Some of those grassland selective herbicides will protect milkweed and some of the nectar producing plants. And then if you do use grass selective herbicides or the only thing you have access to is a broad spectrum herbicide, be sure you spot treat those areas. That way you're causing as little damage as possible to the other good plants out there on the landscape.
And for those odd areas that, you know, landowners may have, what are some recommendations?
Yeah, and these slides kind of show some field borders and odd areas that were excellent places to put in habitat. So, for instance, the picture in the upper left, this is actually a picture of a livestock exclusion practice one of our cooperators did that he was trying to keep the cows out of the woods to protect forest health, but he decided to back off about 60 feet, plant a pollinator habitat in there too. So not only is he getting good forest health, but he's also increasing diversity for pollinators and deer and turkey. And there's cost share available on this for the fence as well through the Department of Natural Resources. And then our agency, the Conservation Department, can piggyback that cost share to help make it reasonable for landowners to do that. The other two pictures I put up there, they're back up. Yeah, those are field borders that we put in through the Conservation Reserve Program. And the reason I put them up there is because the Farm Service Agency offers those field borders to enroll in CRP in exchange for annual rental payments. So lots of programs out there to help in those odd areas too. On some of the production areas, if you got cattle pasture or maybe it's CRP again, there are options to increase diversity out there after a management practice, burning, disking, or spraying. You can come in and interseed lagoons and forbs into those fields, and there's cost share available through Farm Service Agency, through NRCS, other state and local opportunities out there. The best thing you can do, again, and somebody asked this question earlier, is call your private land conservationist and see what's available in your county locally.
Very good. That's some great information. Thank you, Brent. We also hear a lot about some sharp declines in bee populations, and along with, we were talking about monarchs. So with these pollinators in peril, tell us some simple things that folks can do to help.
Well, number one is identify where you can create some more habitat, manage the existing habitat that's out there on the landscape. And really, for more information, I would direct you right to NDC's website. We've got a backyard habitat for monarch. There it is up on the screen. That just provides some excellent habitat recommendations. The Conservation Department's also released a new publication called Milkweeds and Monarchs that has some just some fantastic information for folks that are interested in helping monarchs. We also got some few websites up here, and there's a lot of websites out there to help with monarchs and pollinators, but this is 3 of them that are particularly helpful. The Grow Native website will help you find local seed sources and plant sources to where you can actually purchase seed and or plants. Journey North is a pretty cool website that allows you to monitor the migration of monarchs as they move north and south across the continents. It's really cool. The picture down at the bottom is a screenshot of that. And then Monarch Watch provides information on the education, conservation, and research of the monarch butterfly. But those are some fantastic websites.
So thank you again, Lisa and Brent, for some great information, really about the buzz about pollinators. And we want to thank you, our 160 or so folks who are joining us. So now let's hear from you. Share your questions through the chat box on the right side of your webcast screen, and we will try to cover as much as we can in the time we have left. So let's start with some common questions. Lucas wants to know, in addition to milkweed, again, what are some other common native plants?
Well, Joe, we're actually really lucky in Missouri. We have a great group of native plant producers. So there's lots of options to choose from. Just a couple examples. New England aster, that's you saw that at the very beginning clip that we showed you. Purple coneflower, wild bergamot, rattlesnake master, lead plant. I could go on and on. But as Brent mentioned just a minute ago, a great place to go is grownative.org, and they're going to have a great list of suggested species, but they're also going to have a list of sources of where people can go to buy plants and seed.
Well, again, on behalf of James, one of our listeners who was asking where can you find seed mixes and plants, so Grow Native website's a great source. And what about local nurseries and garden centers?
Yeah. That's absolutely. Check those sites out. Be sure to ask about the native plants. A lot of times there'll be good labeling that will identify whether that species is native to Missouri or not. The reasons why we promote natives, I think I mentioned this earlier, is that they're just better adapted to Missouri. They're going to handle our weather and climate better.
Well, thank you. David wanted to know if you could repeat, how many different types of milkweed are there native to Missouri, and do they kind of look similar?
I believe there's 18 different species native to Missouri, and they look very different. There's some species that might look similar. They might have the same colors. But the great thing about having the multiple species of milkweed is that they bloom at different times. For instance, if you have an early blooming milkweed, well, that's going to be able to provide nesting habitat for those early migrators. But the late blooming milkweeds are going to be able to provide habitat further along the season.
And some species only grow in one part of the state.
Well, that's good to know too. And Brent, if you could repeat some information Sue wanted to know. What do you suggest folks should plant in a neighborhood that has really small areas?
In like a suburban area?
Yeah.
Yeah, really the same sort of thing that Lisa talked about. And I could refer you back to our website, and Grow Native has those too, but they're just little 10 by 10 plots. But, typically you might plant 8 or 10 milkweed plants and then have 6 or 7 different nectar plants that bloom at different times of the year. So specific species, Coreopsis is a good one. Wild bergamot, purple coneflower is always really easy. Partridge pea is pretty easy. Lead plant. There's really a lot of options out there.
And we're talking a lot about the plants that these pollinators need. Question: what about water?
Yeah, we get asked about the bird baths quite a bit. The fact is, pollinators are very adept at finding water on their own from ponds, streams, and puddles out there. And they get much of their nutrient needs through the nectar, but a bird bath can help. One of the things that we recommend folks do if you're specifically interested in the butterflies is put some sand in with that bird bath to kind of create a damp area, prop some rocks up on it so they got roost areas. But what they're really doing is getting salt and other nutrients out of that water-sand mixture. So it can help, but not necessarily necessary.
That is good to know. And Jan wanted to know, what's some of the information on honeybees declining? What do we know about that?
Well, there's a lot of ongoing research looking into the decline of honeybees, and really a lot of the things that we've talked about today, mostly just the degradation or loss of habitat is a primary component. Again, there's going to be several factors that go into it, whether it's invasive species, loss of habitat, overuse of pesticides. They are looking into reasons for colony collapse disorder, but that's all ongoing research. So again, it's just a variety of factors that are all coming to play together for those declines.
Thank you for that. Susan G. also wants to know, these plants we're talking about, are they good for bees too? And also, are hummingbirds at risk for decline because she hasn't really seen many in the last few years?
Well, certainly the plants that we're talking about are good for bees as well. Any of the plants that produce nectar are going to be good for bees. As far as the hummingbirds, I honestly can't tell you off the top of my head if hummingbird numbers are down or not, but I mean, where we see pollinator plots, we see hummingbirds. We mentioned Mark Ramsey had the pictures earlier. He's sent me hundreds of pictures of hummingbirds using foxglove beard tongue, which is another fantastic plant for some of our pollinators. But there are hummingbirds out there where they have habitat.
Good. Regina K. would like to know, we know that the caterpillars eat the milkweed, but are there any other kind of insect predators or threats that aren't good for the milkweed? And is there anything we could do about them?
Well, I don't know if I can list specific pests. Milkweed is good for other species besides just the monarch. There are other insect species that also solely rely on the milkweed to fight against whether it's disease or pests. My best recommendation is to make sure that you're planting those multiple species, so that if one species of milkweed is targeted by a certain pest, you're going to have another species that hopefully isn't and is still going to be blooming and available as a resource.
Good to know. And see, Bill was asking, along highways, sometimes we see some pretty flowers and things like that. So are we working with the Department of Transportation on planting natives along highways and also working with MoDOT on limiting mowing of these areas?
We are in contact with MoDOT. They are a member of our Missouri for Monarchs Collaborative. So we are working with MoDOT to establish pollinator plots and to manage existing habitat that's out there. And I know recently, I don't remember if it's 6 or 8 states, but the different departments of transportation have signed an agreement to manage for monarch up and down the I-35 corridor. So we are in contact with them, and those talks are happening.
And that's good to know. That's been a question by a few folks here. Are there any kind of tips or things people need to know? Susan wants to know as far as planting milkweed and maybe how long the plants take to mature and things like that.
Something we recommend is dormant seeding. The milkweed seed, they often need to go through a period of freezing and thawing to actually really get them started for the next season. So planting them in the fall or over winter, so December through February are great times to plant those seeds. And those seeds will go through that dormant period and be ready to sprout in spring. And it usually, like Brent mentioned earlier, a lot of these native forbs, they spend that first year putting down roots. And so sometimes you'll get a bloom that first year and sometimes you won't. But just remember that they are growing. It just might be underground and you're not seeing it.
I would add that if you're in a suburban area or doing a backyard planting, you're probably better off to buy a potted plant that's already started. It may cost a little more up front, but you don't have to buy as many. And you can refer back to our website where we have some planting diagrams that show you the proper spacing and different species to use with recommendations.
And again, Jerry was saying, so potted plants, and again, the plants that are sold at the big box stores, those are okay as long as they're listed as native?
We prefer the native species just because they're more adapted to our climate. They tend to produce more nectar, attract. We got a research project going on at Bradford Farms right now. It's only in the second year, but it's showing that native plants there's more species of pollinators showing up to use our native plants than there are non-native, I shouldn't say non-native, but non-Missouri source seed.
Okay, that's good to know.
In other words, plants that are adapted to this climate are attracting more insects.
Our best.
Yeah.
Karen C. wants to know, are we seeing some problems with swallowtail butterflies? Because last year and this year she's not really seen any, and she used to.
I personally don't have any specific information on their population numbers, but again, if there's a loss of habitat out there, that it's going to affect all the pollinators and all the bees out there. So unfortunately, I don't have the information specifically on that species right now.
Well, that's good to know. In general, Carolyn F. wants to know, I think, Brent, maybe you could help here, any idea how many milkweeds are produced by our state nursery this year, and any plans for kind of growing that project?
Yeah, I couldn't begin to tell you how many plants are produced, but the plants they are producing are going to use on public land right now for projects on our public land that's open to everyone. I would say that if you are going to try to establish habitat on your property, you know, we shoot for 200 stems per acre is a goal. And that sounds like a lot, but one milkweed plant may have 8 or 10 stems. So the idea is the more milkweed out there on the landscape, the better. But 200 stems per acre is a good goal. And I don't know if I answered your question completely there or not. But I can't tell you how many stems we have at the nursery. But I can tell you that we're also working with native seed vendors to make sure there's plenty of seed source out there for folks who are interested in establishing pollinator plots.
And Lisa, you touched on the flight of the monarch across really the whole continent. So are there any kind of things that we're doing, working with partners on a nationwide level to help these pollinators?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's been a couple years now where pretty much the entire country has taken notice of this decline. And because this is the only North American species that actually migrates across 3 different countries, we actually have input and are working with Canada and Mexico. So all 3 countries are working together to make sure that we're restoring habitat all along that migratory route. And also just within the state Fish and Wildlife agencies, all those agencies in the Midwest are working together to coordinate plans and make sure that we get enough habitat on the ground across the entire range.
I would add specifically in Missouri, we've got a lot of diverse groups at the table helping with, I mean, from Audubon Society to local agriculture groups. Missouri Farm Bureau provided a video for us we couldn't get to play today. We tried, couldn't get the sound to work. They've been a good partner. MFA, Monsanto, a lot of the ag groups are at the table, and a lot of diverse groups are working together to help help these monarchs.
Yeah. It's really this whole process, or this whole coming together on behalf of the monarch butterfly has just been amazing. It's one of those iconic species that everyone, whether you live out on the farm or live in the city, most people have a story about the monarch butterfly. So that really is bringing such a diverse stakeholder group and partners all working on the same problem.
Well, one of our participants, Gil, asked that question, so hopefully we gave him some good information. Not getting too specific here, Brent, but Carl H. was asking, he's using Select Max, 12.6% on heavily tall infested Johnson grass fields. And do you know of any better herbicides or more cost-effective ones? I mean, without promoting certain things, but what's some good advice?
That Select is a good it's a grass selective herbicide, and it is a good herbicide to get grass out of your wildfires and forbs. There may be some other ones out there. That is a good one, specifically for Johnson grass. It doesn't have anything to do with monarchs. You know, Outrider is a good herbicide, but I honestly would have to look at that label to see what it would do to some of your other desirable forbs. I know it won't hurt your native grasses, but that is a good herbicide to use.
That is good to know. And again, we thank you for your patience. We're getting a lot of questions, and we encourage you to submit your questions through the chat function on the right side of your webcast screen. So, let's see. Sue A. wants to know, are we still doing butterfly tagging projects?
That would actually, I know that's going on. I'm not 100% sure whether the Missouri Department of Conservation participates in that, but there is a lot of organizations, for instance, Monarch Watch, Journey North, where we can find more information on that program. But that's a great way that the researchers are better tracking to see where the monarchs are migrating through, where the survivability of that migration. So it's a great program.
Well, and again, Sue G's asking where to buy native potted plants. So if we can just repeat some of those sources.
Yeah. Go to the grownatives.org site. They have a list of vendors here in the state. You can also check out your local nurseries or garden centers and make sure you're asking about those, where are those native plants to Missouri.
Good to know. Thank you. Let's see. Carolyn F. wants to know, will we be posting this webinar later to share with other groups? And I could tell you that that answer is yes. So they can go back to this information, and all of our webinars are posted where you registered. So that is good to know. Again, we encourage folks, if you have questions, join the conversation by submitting them to through the chat box on the right-hand side. So what else can you tell us as far as some of the programs that the Missouri Department of Conservation offers to help landowners build habitat for pollinators?
Yeah, you know, our private land conservationists work in the USDA offices, so we have our own program called the Landowner Assistance Program that basically offers 75% cost share to establish a pollinator plot, depending on where you're at and what geography. That could change a little bit. And then sometimes there's incentive payments for that as well. Now, I mentioned we work in the USDA offices. We're right side by side with some of our partners like the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, the Farm Service Agency, NRCS. All those different agencies have cost share practices out there through the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, there's CRP. There's lots of options out there, but again, the best thing to do would be to stop in that office and start asking questions, and they can point you in the right direction to what program will work for you. Some are more conducive to production landowners, some are better for recreational landowners, and there's other opportunities out there with Missouri naturalists and stuff like that to get involved too if you want to physically go out and get your hands dirty. You know, that's not all about cost share and technical assistance, but finding places where you can go help install a project like the pollinator projects that the students were doing at schools. Master naturalists are always doing good things in some of our suburban areas.
And, you know, I would add, too, for folks in general, that we have our nature centers located throughout the state, and all of them have outside areas that are planted with native plants. So throughout the season, folks can visit our nature centers and see monarchs and other pollinators in action, get a better idea of what types of plants do well in different areas.
I think we talked about seed for the nursery earlier. You know, we're taking volunteers to harvest seed in the fall for that effort too. So that's those master naturalists go out and harvest seed, bring it down to the nursery, they clean it, and we get it going and get that seed base started. Because there has been high demand for some of these milkweed species and pollinator species in the last couple of years. So.
Well, and again, Jeff wants to know, how important is it that we individuals get involved in helping our pollinators?
I think it's very important. It's one of those things that every little bit can help, whether you're doing a 10 by 10 area in your backyard or if you're able to do, you know, a handful of acres on your farm, everybody can help. And it's going to take everyone in order to reach our habitat goals and support the population.
You know, and to add on to that, there are some naysayers out there, and we say, well, we need to increase habitat on public land and along MoDOT right-of-ways, but you got to remember 90% of Missouri is privately owned, so everybody has a stake in this. And you know, as I said earlier, 75% of your food is created by those insects. 4 out of 5 mouthfuls are coming straight to your table from pollinators. So everybody plays a role, and really what's cool about it is there's a lot of people interested in monarchs. There just really are. So everyone can certainly play a role, and everyone should when they can.
All right. Heather wants to know, now, is it illegal to collect plant seeds or plants from public lands such as conservation areas or the side of the road?
Well, we certainly recommend not collecting seed from public areas or along roadsides. If you are interested, contact your local Department of Transportation and ask questions. But really, if you want to make sure that you're getting the right seed in the right place, I would recommend contacting the seed vendors throughout Missouri, and they'll have a lot of information to help you with that. But really, we don't recommend going out and collecting seed yourself.
Right, and just want to emphasize that it's not allowed to collect plants and such from conservation areas.
Right. And
every time somebody does that, even though it may be just a few plants, that adds up. So kind of leave nature in nature and get these plants from, as you said, some sources outside of the wild. And Greg's just asking, generally, what's the data showing pollinator decline?
Well, there's all sorts of research out there. Probably just pertinent most to this conversation here was that graph that I showed you, where people are going down not only in Mexico and monitoring that population, monitoring that size of the population, but that's just one example for one of the pollinator species out there. But the Department of Conservation, we have an entire division that goes out and looks at topics like this. We have, I think, a project right now that's looking at how insects and pollinators repollinate grassland restorations. So there's just so many examples of whether it's Department of Conservation or local colleges, research institutes, it's happening all over the place.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for that. And again, thanks to about the 160 folks who have joined us for this wild webcast. We have about 5 minutes left for some questions. So again, we encourage you to send us your questions through the chat box on the right side of your webcast screen. And we have time for a few more questions. So if you have those, please share them. Jill's asking, I might brutalize this pronunciation, she's heard about neonicotinoids. Is that
neonicotinoids?
How do you pronounce that?
Oh, I could butcher it too as well. Neonicotinoids.
And what are those? Something like that. What are they?
Neonicotinoids are a chemical compound that are on treated seeds. So a lot of times farmers will use a neonicotinoid coating. It would be pink or green that goes on the outside of a soybean or a corn. And neonicotinoids get a lot of attention for decline of pollinators. But the flip side of that you have to remember is they also help our farmers produce food. So, but those neonics or neonicotinoids are basically an insecticide that's on the seed to keep insects from destroying the seed before it sprouts.
Well, that is good to know. I was not aware of that. Let's see, we're scrolling through some more questions that we're getting from folks. And again, somebody who joined us late was asking about what kind of native plants are good for butterflies and other pollinators. So David K. is wondering that.
There's all sorts of examples. Lead plant, purple coneflower, gray-headed coneflower.
I would say, I'll just use my place as an example. I have a 25 species mix, but foxglove beard tongue is a fantastic one that blooms early. It's a white. Tick-seed coreopsis, lance-leaf coreopsis. In the next few weeks, I've got yellow crown beard blooming in my house right now. Yellow coneflower will be blooming before too long. Purple coneflower is starting to bloom now.
Blazing star.
Blazing star.
Wild bergamot.
Blazing star will be another one in about a month. And then a lot of your asters will bloom late September and October. Golden aster, New England aster, which we've talked about, smooth aster. There's really just a lot of them out there. But the whole idea is to find those plants that there's 2 or 3 species blooming during different time periods.
Right, and I could tell you, at my home plots that the coneflowers are really kicking in. The coreopsis has been going crazy, even getting some early black-eyed Susan and things. And a lot of those will self-seed and spread pretty rapidly. I have to divide them a lot and give a lot of them away. Susan G wants to know, does milkweed naturally spread through its area, kind of like that nasty invasive honeysuckle, or does it have to be divided and replanted or reseeded?
Well, milkweed actually, like Brent actually mentioned earlier, you can plant just one stem, but it will grow. That one plant will actually stem off to 10 or more stems, so it will naturally propagate itself.
Spread through rhizomes.
Okay, so it spreads underground through rhizomes and then kind of pops up all around it. So no worries, Susan G. If you get a few plants in over the course of time, they will spread quite a bit.
Yeah.
It's good to know. And I would also just suggest personally, folks, with the butterfly bush, that beautiful bright orange, those do take a while to get going. So if you plant seedlings of those, be patient. It will take a few years, I've found, to get some flowers off of those. Marcy wants to know, what are some ways we can get kids involved with helping butterflies and planting native plants and things?
You know, that's a good question, and one answer that jumps right out front is, you know, there's opportunities with 4-H. I know we recently got a Missouri Conservation Heritage Foundation grant to have 4-H's produce pollinator plots or establish pollinator plots outside their clubhouses or churches or wherever. So that's one really good way, is to go through 4-H, through Boy Scouts. There are opportunities to do that. And of course, the pollinator plots, which we've been with Quail forever, the pollinator plots for kids. I can't remember what it's called now.
Yeah.
But
good information. Carl H. was saying that his rural public school has 3 kindergarten classes, and he's wondering any advice on what size plot would be good for them to put in and maintain and then get to see the magic of the monarchs throughout the season.
Yeah, again, a 100 square foot area is a minimum. Depending if you're in a rural school, you might be able to do more than that, but I would shoot for something that's 100 square feet up to the size of a quarter acre to start.
Okay. Simple question from Dan here. Is butterfly weed that we showed, the bright orange, is that different than butterfly bush?
Yes, it is. Yes.
And it's called butterfly weed, but that's still milkweed.
Correct.
Well, butterfly weed is a native plant that we recommend, you know, on drier sites. Butterfly bush, it attracts a lot of butterflies, but it's a non-native plant, and we're not sure that they get a whole lot out of that plant. It's one of them deals where they don't get the nutrients that we would like them to get. So I mean, I've had people show me a butterfly bush, I believe it's blue or purple, that it blooms. It attracts a lot of butterflies, but they're always there eating it because they're not getting nothing out of it.
Okay, and you know, that's good to know, and I'll tell you, I do know that butterfly bush, that isn't native, and oftentimes it will not survive some severe weather, either the intense hot summer heat or severe cold weather. They die off a lot, unlike our native plants, which, Lisa, as you mentioned, are adapted over thousands of millions of years for Missouri.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jim.
Could you add again, Christy K wanted to know, do monarchs need water sources, and can you touch on that?
They get most of their nutrients through nectar. You can add water sources. You know, a lot of folks like to do bird baths and things like that, but really they just need some damp areas, so where they can get just a little bit of minerals and water.
Well, folks, our time is about up. Great conversation here. Thank you so much for your questions. And again, thank you to Brent and Lisa for some great information and a great conversation.
Thank you, and thanks for people for listening.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
We appreciate it. And we also invite you to join us again, folks, on Thursday, September 8th, from 2 to 3 p.m. for our next MDC Wild Webcast, Be Bear Aware. We will talk about black bears in Missouri, including some wild research that we're doing to better understand them and what we all can do to prevent problems with hungry bears. And later in the year, we invite you back to join us on Thursday, October 13th, from 6 to 7 p.m. to learn about the deadly deer disease called chronic wasting disease, or CWD. We will talk about what it is, what we're doing at the Department of Conservation to help limit its spread in Missouri deer, and what hunters, landowners, and others can do to help protect our white-tailed deer from chronic wasting disease, or CWD. We hope you found today's MDC Wild Webcast, The Buzz About Pollinators, helpful and inspiring. And you can learn more about pollinators and black bears and all kinds of things and ways to discover nature through our website at mdc.mo.gov. On behalf of Brent and Lisa and all of us here at MDC, thanks for joining us and have a great day. This wraps up our Wild Webcast.